Hey everyone, my name is Jack Mackenzie and I am a Scottish composer, orchestrator and arranger, and this video is just a little bit different from what I normally do. The studio is in a bit of a redesign, so I don't have my camera on, but I just wanted to talk you through this new library that I was sent. And it is the VWinds, the VWinds double reed. So that contains oboe 1, oboe 2, cor anglais, bassoon 1, bassoon 2, and contrabassoon. I'd like to thank John at Acoustic Samples for sending me this brilliant library. I mean, a lot of the library's reviews that I do, I maintain that I am not biased. And regardless of whether they have been sent to me or if I have purchased them myself. But I mean, I have to say, this library is just brilliant. I'm a huge fan of sample modeling techniques. I love the sample modeling brass. I love the RM Venture woodwinds and RM Venture brass. And this is kind of the same. So this is using real life recordings of instruments and people, but the way that it's programmed makes that, or means that, there's much more flexibility in performance and playing. One of the big things is specifically trill. So, like for instance, if I take the oboe here, I can control the speed, the dynamics, the definition, the intensity of these trills, and I think that when you're doing very intricate lines in orchestration and in your orchestral mock-ups, having the ability to access these sorts of libraries just makes it so much easier than key switching or having different tracks for different articulations. There's so much control in this library, and I don't think I could go into as much detail as well as they have on their own site and their own YouTube channel. But I just wanted to go over a few different things. So when you first open the page, you have, this is what it looks like. And we have CC1 is already mapped to, they call it air, but it's basically dynamics, and it's your normal modulation. And when it comes to wind instruments, the amount of air that you push through the instrument will change not only the loudness of the instrument, but also what's called the timbre, which is the physical change in sound, depending on the loudness of the instrument being played. For instance, a horn being played at piano will sound much different than a horn being played at triple F. There's a certain kind of brassy, higher, raspy tone that you get from a horn at that larger, higher dynamic, whereas at the smaller dynamics, it's much more mellow and rounded. And I think that that is one of the key aspects of making sure that your mock-ups are sounding real, is not automating volume without also automating your dynamics and expression. They are so key to making it a believable sound. So here we have the main view. So we've got CC1 here. We also have vibrato. Now I've mapped that to CC11. It doesn't automatically come through as CC11 in all of them, but I feel like CC11 I use and CC1 I use, and they are right next to each other on my MIDI controller, so they're much easier to use. So what that means is I can control not only the dynamics, and you can hear there's almost very, very little change between those dynamic layers. They are brilliantly crafted in a way that you can't hear that change. And again, that's one of the key things of realism. A lot of sample library developers will often sample maybe piano, mezzo forte, and triple F, and trying to crossfade between those different layers sometimes is very noticeable. One, it makes it really hard to program, and two, it means that even an untrained ear can tell that it's a sampled instrument compared to a live instrument, because there's that sudden jump or glitch that you can hear. So not only can I control CC1 very beautifully and very slowly, but also I can control the depth of vibrato. So this is without vibrato. And let's just bring in a little bit of vibrato just as it reaches that top dynamic. Again, it's not a lot, but it's just enough to give that sense of expression that you need from a player. We can also change this with the attack as well. So you see at the very end there the change in kind of that almost fall or gliss between notes, and that's done with a really, really soft velocity between two notes. Have a listen again. So this is much more prominent in other instruments, but it's a very, very soft transition. Whereas if I do a higher velocity, much more pronounced, much more definite, much more deliberate. Whereas if I do a non-connected change, you can almost hear the retonguing of a note rather than that kind of legato transition. And one of the big things I think that people often overuse is legato, and they see legato as this kind of shining pinnacle of modern day sample mock-ups and demos, and they tend to just overlap every note in brass, in strings, in winds, and that's not what a real player would do. A real player would have to re-articulate somewhere. You couldn't just have a big legato slur line over the entire phrase, otherwise it would just sound washy, and there's no change, there's no color, there's no intricacy, there's no making it sound a bit more interesting. So kind of using that kind of different velocities mixed with different articulations, different modulation and expression changes. I think that it just makes it feel like it's a more expressive line rather than just one constant flow of legato. So the first thing that we have is these kind of three tabs at the bottom, and we have mix, and that takes us to the microphones. So now you can see a kind of visual diagram of where the microphones were placed when they recorded this instrument. 1 is being very up close, 2 is a little farther away, and 3 is more of a kind of a section microphone, but they're all still mono. And you have the chance to change these microphones. And I think that I often prefer the closer microphones because you're able to get that detail. I can cut out detail, but I can't always get that detail back. So I feel that it's better to use much more close-up microphones than it is to use a slightly farther away microphone, because I love that kind of definition that you get from the woodwind players. Even though in most orchestral settings the winds are quite far back in the mix, I think that even if you get the key noises or the breath of the flute or the breath of the clarinet reed, I think that it just gives it a little bit more interesting and again that kind of realism from a player. And again, I can change where this panning is within the plugin. And this makes it a bit easier to control all your mixes if you have something that's already pre-saved as a setting. It means that you're not doing it within your DAW all the time. It means that you can change slightly different mixes and use your automation faders and your panning plugins or your panning settings as a way to mix rather than place your instruments. So what we can do is if we actually take down these close mics here and we make sure that the virtual mics is set up, this takes us on to the next part, which is the virtual space. And what they've created is this impulse response reverb that's within the plugin that allows them to physically place this very dry instrument into a virtual space. And it means that you can mix within the plugin and place it within a hall or a setting that you desire. So at the moment you can see that the oboe is up close in front, right in the center here. But what, say, if I put it where the oboe 1 is supposed to be, which is right in this front row here? You can hear that it's much more mellower, it's much more further back. You can kind of hear the space. Now, if I did something drastic just to kind of show you what this IR can do, let's just shove it off to the right here. And this is brilliant for making sure that you are not really panning your instruments in your DAW. And I think that a lot of people when mixing come into trouble with that, depending on, there's an argument whether you want to balance pan, which is changing the levels between the left and right channel, or if you're stereo panning, which is when you're shifting the entire stereo space. And that can kind of confuse a lot of people that are maybe not really into mixing. And there's still a bit of debate on which one should be used with which libraries or which type of setting or which type of instrument. So this kind of makes that process a lot simpler and basically decides it for you. And you can easily just use the picker to pick exactly where you want this instrument to be. Now this is just the oboe, and what I've done is I've taken 3 examples from film scores that I love, and just kind of let you hear the setting of this virtual space. So this is from the iconic Harry Potter segment. So this is using the 2 oboes and the cor anglais. But just to show the difference, I'm going to play the exact same excerpt again, but only using the dry, close mono signals. You can see that the sound is very direct. There's no panning in there. But it's also you can hear that definition, the key sounds that I was talking about, and that's what I love as well. So to kind of house the middle here, I use the dry signals purely from the from this library, but I also use it in conjunction with this plugin, which is called Berlin Studio by Samplicity, and it's basically a convolution reverb of the Teldec scoring stage in Berlin. And now I love this place. I love the hall. I love the sound. I can make a whole new video on just this plugin. But if we combine this plugin with the dry sounds and the quality of samples from acoustic samples, then we get something like this. And to me, that just, it has the best of both worlds. It sits instruments in a room, in a place, in a real room, but having the definition of the detailed sampling of acoustic samples library that makes it all the better. You can still hear the definition and the articulation and the key noises from the close mics that they've recorded, but to me it sounds like it's in a room. So the second excerpt here is from the asteroid belt from Star Wars Empire Strikes Back, and I think it's really good to kind of show off the relationship between those double reeds. So we've got the 2 bassoons, the 2 oboes, and the cor anglais in this one. So this is the acoustic samples right out of the box using the virtual space. I feel like their virtual space still lends itself to a direct, detailed sound. And we change that to just the mono signals. I mean, you can hear the tongues, you can hear the breath, you can hear the clicking, you can hear the detail in that. I just think it's brilliant. But then we add that into the Berlin Studio plugin, and this is what you get. I think personally it's a beautiful sound, and I love the sound of the room. And again, reverbs and places and halls are just up to personal preference, and I tend to like this space a lot actually. But again, you have the detailed instrument, and it all comes back to the quality of the samples that you are dealing with, or the quality of the players. And Acoustic Samples, yeah, just knocked it out of the park. And the final excerpt that I wanted to show was a little one from Sherlock Holmes: A Game of Shadows, and I think that again it kind of shows off that relationship between the reeds, and it's a great little motif, and I love it personally. So I wanted to get it in here somewhere. So here is the virtual space using acoustics right out of the box. Great sound, great room, great spatial awareness. I think it's fantastic. And then, just in comparison, what we'll do is we'll listen to the dry sounds from Acoustic Samples. What I love about this library as well is that, and why I've chosen this excerpt in particular, is the repeated notes. And I just feel like it doesn't sound like a machine gun. It doesn't sound like the same samples being played over and over again. It sounds new. It sounds like every note is different in some sort of way. And I think, again, that's the benefit of having something that's sample modeled rather than actually completely based on audio samples, because you will have round robins, but they will repeat or they will change in different ways. But then sometimes, depending on how many repeated notes you have, especially from strings, you can start to hear the pattern, and as soon as you hear that, you understand that it's not real, and that it's a sampled instrument. And last but not least, the dry sounds, but with the Berlin Studio plugin. I could go into a lot more detail, but I think that Acoustic Samples has a fantastic YouTube plethora of videos on their own channel, and they go into much more depth about how to use the instruments and how to tweak them and how to use them to the way that you play. I mean, as you can probably tell, I'm not a very good accomplished piano player, but it means that I can still play. I can even program these lines of music rather than playing them in live. I think that that's one of the big things about this library, is to make sure that you're not put off that you have to be able to play the piano well to get exactly what you want. It probably helps, but I'm not a great piano player, and I can still program in these lines and still get as much detail as I need to. I think for what you get from this library, it's well worth the price. I think that the main difference, if I had to compare it to Aaron Venture's Infinite Winds, is that it's very similar in playability and style, but Acoustic Samples has managed to capture the raw sound of an instrument and maintain it whilst also giving you the advantage of this sample modeled production. I think that sometimes, especially with the Aaron Venture stuff, you start to lose the tone of the instrument, and it becomes a bit more noticeable that it is a sampled instrument. And that's why I think that they're great for sitting back in the orchestra, especially if it's a very dense piece of music. But even this library allows you to have those really subtle solo moments that still sound expressive and like a real player, as well as being able to put them far back in the section as well. And I think that that's extremely hard to do, and these guys have hit it off the park. So I love this library. I hope to God that they do a flutes and clarinets, because I would love my entire wind section to be from this sort of library. It makes it so good to play with, to work on. I feel like that my ideas are easy translated from my mind into the DAW, and I think that it's just, yeah, it's a pretty damn good library. So thank you to John for sending me a copy, and I hope that you guys can pick up a copy yourself. This is VWinds from Acoustic Samples.